I had something, whatever the hell it was. It was the worst I've had in a while. I ended up missing days of work, and it's hard for me to justify missing days of work when I'm at home. But I've started taking them off. Like I have time off. Like they're urgently telling me to use it. So
Yeah, you're like running up against the deadline to use your time off each year, but you're like, you know what? I want to write more. Give me more
yeah, yeah. Well, I
content.
mean, I could. It's one of those like take it as you need it things. That's the rule there
Mhm.
for me, and I never need it, so I never take it. So like somebody just noticed, like, oh yeah, you've taken 2 days off in the past like four. It's like, yeah, yeah, I took a long weekend. Another time I added a day to Martin Luther King Day so I could go somewhere.
Did,
that's been
what an
that's my use of
exciting
it
way!
since
What an
2018.
exciting way to use your PTO. That's
Yeah, yeah. My boss was just auditing that at one point because HR had her looking into it, and she was like, "Yeah, you just start taking PTO, take time off." I was like, "Oh, okay."
like Oliver, our system has flagged you. You have really big red flag here. You're like, oh my god,
Yeah,
is everything okay? Like what's been going on? Yeah, you actually are working a little bit too much there, sir.
yeah, yeah. Well, I'm just, I'm. That's a terrible thing. Like, as much as I critique the system in different places, I'm very much a bad example of it because I'm constantly grinding. The grind sect.
Yeah, it never stops. And I'm curious because it sounds like, and we spoke about this very, very briefly beforehand, like while we were organizing this. And I've seen you talk about your dad a ton on your Twitter, and you've
Yeah, yeah.
written,
He's a character.
I've read some pieces that you've written about him. Um, I mean, is there it, I don't is there someone that is even is it possible there's anyone in your life more influential on your like grind than your dad?
No, no. He looms large, even though he's no longer with us. No, there's no. Both in terms of like demonstrating how to work the grind and how not to work it, and both of those things. I think he is sort of like. I don't think anybody ever studied another person. Maybe like Boswell studying Samuel Johnson or something when he's writing the biography of him. Like I studied my dad because like I said, I was homeschooled till the ninth grade. My dad would come home every day for lunch when he was working, and so he was always there. And then when he's taking days off, as he often did, he was just there. So we were just there. So I studied him intently, and he is truly an influence for good or for ill because when he was stringing together work, he was very prolific, and when he wasn't working, he was like crashing and burning. Like he was like work 3 months, like 3 months of continuous work, 2 months of rest type of guy. And so that was sort of the model that I saw. And what I've tried to do, what this has ended up doing for me is kind of I probably overwork as a result, not out of any like like tremendous like cultural pressure, but just out of this like individual. I've had moments of like extreme privation. No, the family has literally run out of money despite once having lots of it. Like it just decided to stop working and waste all the money. Just literally, why'd you do it? Well, just being ornery. Just decided to call it. I saw a white light, told me to stop working, and so I've tried never to. Now I'm still in the age range before that. He was 42 when I was born, so I'm still in the age range before this like late 40s decline began for him. So I think some of this is just me worrying that like when am I gonna have my moment when uh I'm talking about no longer working and going to live in a park school bus down on the Pitt County line or something like that, or writing to my old high school girlfriend to get her to buy a house for me in Montana because I
Wow.
don't have any money, which she did.
Wow. I mean,
63 years old, hasn't spoken to her in 45 years, finds her name through a skip tracing service back in 2002. They start dating again, and then they buy a house, and then they're living in Montana. And that's how he lived there until he died in his bed.
wow.
He died penniless. I mean, all of his money was gone, but he lived pretty large up until the end, and he told me that's why he never explained to her why he dumped her. You always leave one in reserve.
Holy shit.
It was truly a
Holy
long game.
shit.
It was truly a long game. It was like when his fourth marriage had ended, he had this one ready to roll where he was like, well, with Suzanne, we never quite wrapped this up, and maybe
Maybe
she still thinks
45
I'm
years
the
later.
yeah, she had just gotten divorced as well, or like within a recent period. So it was perfect for him to, kind of come back in. He had been a real all-star back in high school. And so he still had a lot of, his stock was still pretty high. Also, between marriages, he would usually lose his typical 40 to 50 pounds. The overall weight would increase steadily over time, but he would drop the weight
Excess. Yeah.
between, yeah. So he would get down, he'd hit the stepper, he'd hit the weights. So he was looking pretty good for 63, quite strong for 63. That would be his last hurrah, and then he would gradually balloon up once again before he had a heart attack, had a couple heart attacks, and then passed away. But he had it all laid out. He wanted to live to be 75. He did. He wanted to die in his own bed. He did, and he wanted to live out his last years in Montana away from people, and he did. So I've never, I that life will never be duplicated. But I also don't want to. I don't want to model that behavior for my daughter. Like I just want her to see, that I worked and put in all this time to provide material benefit to her, but at the same time, there's this like if my dad were alive, he would be telling me like, "Son, you're a sucker. By the time you're 50, she's not even going to want to talk to you." And whereas I had the time of my life, and you still talk to me till the day I died.
I I I don't even know how to pick that apart. That's
No,
I
I know he would say it too. He probably wrote it in an email somewhere. I know he would say it.
I've spoken to a bunch of different dads, and one common theme is a lot of it is like how do you include the things from your father that you want and then edit out or
Oh,
remove the things from your dad that you
that,
didn't that you don't want.
that, but that's all. I mean, that's really what I'm doing. I mean, my dad was a genius at cobbling together different types of jobs, but he had a bad tendency to go off the wagon and go on sort of benders and go on sprees and just let it all crumble. So he was like, I want to just do the building without the collapse and the rebuilding. Like he told me he loved making comebacks. I don't want to have to keep making comebacks. Now I've had setbacks in my own life in different ways, and I've had to, some of them, most of them involved him. And so I had to make comebacks as well. And he loved a comeback. He's like, there's nothing you can sell better than a comeback story. Everybody likes a comeback, comeback player of the year.
I mean, yeah, I guess that's it's true in sports for a season or one game, or no one's ever
Yeah.
going to forget Brady and the Patriots and the Falcons. No one's ever going to forget that. But it's a little bit different with being a dad or having a dad. That I think stability goes a long way, right? I
Yeah,
think
you don't need a dad to have bug out plans. Like if you don't need a dad to have like, here's my plan for getting my wife arrested if she tries to get me arrested, which I actually executed, which he did execute in 1996, and like, walk scot free. She had to go through quite an ordeal. Truly, I mean, like, and he had plans like this for everything. like you got to do something to him, but he had a comeback because, like he would tell me, and some of the stuff you've likely read, it's you or me, buddy.
I
You better want it to be you, because I'm gonna want it to be me.
I didn't I almost I mean, I didn't really believe. I didn't believe. I don't know what else to say. I did not believe that your dad was uh that way. I didn't
There's
believe he was the
something lovable
character.
about him,
Oh, for
anyway. There was
sure.
some, but and then people have offered different interpretations of that. I mean, some people remember him explaining that, and maybe some have said, like, well, he was in his 60s then, so he probably assumed that you would kill him and that would make him happy if you guys fought because you would have done what he wanted because he couldn't have won at that point or something. I'm like, no, no, that dude was just never going to go down. Like if you like watch those if you watch those videos of like a bull goring a lion and the lion still is able to kill the bull before it dies, that was my dad. Like, you weren't getting out unscathed.
No.
And he was going to get his before he got, like Marshawn Lynch said. He was going to get his more than he got, though. Like, also, like Marshawn Lynch said. I mean,
Yeah.
long before Marshawn Lynch ever said that was the attitude I was raised with every day. You know, I'm I'm gonna get mine, so you better get yours.
Is this where the work comes from? Is this where the work is born?
The work means a whole bunch of things. My mom is a really strict Catholic, so the work is actually a reference to, and although she can't be a part of it, but the work is actually a reference to among other things, Opus Dei, which is sometimes called the work. It's a reference to doing the work, which is this kind of like empty phrase that people say now. It's a reference to actually working, which I do. I work around the clock. And, it's a reference to working people. As my dad said, you always got to be working people. It's a reference to pro wrestlers working the crowd, which is more or less the same thing. Like, I work in marketing, so I know when like a phrase like that, when I began using it, that's when the follower count went up. It was very deliberate. Like, it's a phrase, all the phrases, like they all mean like 52 different things. And so the work means all of those things, but it's the kind of thing he would have come up with. A lot of the stuff that I write and say is stuff that he probably talked about with me, but just couldn't execute in this type of form. He just couldn't. This wasn't his area. You know what I mean? Like, being on a podcast wouldn't have been his thing, or writing an article, or working on a value proposition, or something like that. But in like a small scale, like writing a newspaper ad or local TV commercial, he would have, or the jingle for the car dealership, he would have done something like that. But I watched all that, and I've adapted it to what what I do all day. Basically, like when he was working, he worked round the clock. Like, everything was part of the work. He didn't separate work and life. Like, he was always doing something. He always had some little deal going. He always had some other job he was doing for somebody, and he just kept track of it. Like, he kept track. I mean, I have pretty detailed Excel spreadsheets and things like that. But if my wife didn't want those to be there, I wouldn't keep them. Or if my boss didn't want like large amounts of record keeping and like Airtables or smart sheets or something, I wouldn't. I would just run it. I would just run it off the, you know, what's upstairs. Yeah.
The
I
old
mean,
noggin.
God forbid you start to lose your mind, though. That's kind of what happens. Like, if you start getting dementia or Alzheimer's, that whole system falls apart.
It
There's
does
a,
very
my
quickly.
my brother had a story about my dad. My brother was drafted. My half brother was drafted into running the parts department of my dad's Chrysler dealership, because we like to run with like 4 employees tops in a franchise car dealership, 3 to 4, keep it lean.
That's right. Very
Always,
lean.
always keep it lean. So it fell to Sam when he was 16 or 17 to basically go through and just do the books with the aid of just a bookkeeper, not an accountant, to just do the books for the entire back of the house. And so they worked for weekend after weekend and finally got everything straight. Like, years of records just that weren't being turned into Mopar, which was like the company, like the name for the Dodge parts or whatever. They pulled all of that together. And my dad looked at it. He's like, "Oh, son of a bitch, son, you got to throw this away." He's like, "If I can understand what's going on here, they certainly can too." And Sam was like, "Who's they?" And he's like, anyone that might be looking into what I'm doing here."
That's amazing.
He's like, "There's a way you do this so it looks like you tried to do your due diligence, but you didn't have a clue what you were doing. You just confused the hell out of them."
So the clarity was the issue. The fact that it was actually done to a certain degree like actual end result makes sense to
Yeah.
somebody. Yep.
Yeah, and I mean, there are better examples of this out there. Like, there's a 30 for 30 ESPN special on the guy that basically committed massive wire fraud to buy the New York Islanders, and like would slow walk, like replying to like when he would get cornered on something like, "When's this transfer coming in?" or "Where's this money coming from?" He had an excuse. He almost like secured ownership of the team for good. He would have been able to sell it and make a profit had he reached that stage. What my dad did money wise was stuff very similar to that. It just on a lower, like less ambitious. Like, he didn't have a plan to buy a sports team, but that was sort of the nature of all of this stuff. It all involved a lot of confusion. It relied heavily on like systems in the 70s and 80s not catching up.
Sure.
Like, today, things are immediate. But in the 80s, 90s, you could fudge documents, make things look like other things, like screw things up, like smudge things on the facts. I mean, he was a master of all this type of stuff. So I watched that type of work go on. And he would always talk about, you're buying yourself another week or another month or another year or whatever. So what drives me honestly is just not wanting to have to stoop to that kind of stuff. I mean, as interesting as it was exciting, I guess, in a way. Looking back on it, it was kind of exciting. By comparison, what I do now is very boring. But I just wouldn't want to. I wouldn't want to put my family through those kind of ups and downs. It was hard enough leaving academia for a job in the corporate world and moving back home to Pittsburgh from Texas and other things we had to do. And even then, there was literally there was no period when we weren't earning. You know what
Yeah.
I mean? But like, this guy from 82 to 99 when he retired probably worked 6 years out of those two,
Wow.
out of that whole stretch. I think 6 real years. How do you do that and like live in nice houses and buy like have nice stuff? How do you swing it? He did for a while, and then and then really what happened is he just wore out. He couldn't keep it
Yeah. It,
up, and he
it
just
caught up with
decided
him.
he decided to tap out.
Too exhausting.
Yeah, he had a rigid religious revelation at a car dealers convention in Tampa. He said, saw a white light. It told him he wouldn't have to work again, and so instead of trying to sell the dealership, he decided to let it run itself into the ground. So he
That's
would just be at home in his tidy whities, like stretched out over the floor, laying back, and I, I would be home too because I was being homeschooled, and you know,
these
"Oh, I'm not going in there today. Oh, your brother's there." My brother had to dropped out his senior year of high school to run the car dealership. Came back a year later and finished. Not many kids were made, not not many parents used their kids quite like that. Like, I was put into a typing class at age 10 at Pitt County Community College, like a clerical skills class, so I could learn how to run the front of the house by the time I was 12 or 13. And since I was being homeschooled, theoretically I would be able to be moved into that role.
I it's almost like how farms were run
Yeah.
for like a million years,
Yeah, yeah.
basically.
The oldest technology in the world, he'd say, kids.
Kids, yeah. That's exactly
So we're
what
talking about kids, but that was how he honestly, he wanted to leave the business. He wanted to, in some weird way, he wanted to create. And that was why he went into like a legitimate business after years of fairly illegitimate ones, like having a franchise car dealership in his mind in the 80s would have been sort of like the big thing, his kids would pass it on and develop it and grow it, and we would do better. We'd be better educated than he was, and we would grow up in the business and have it. And instead, it we didn't have it, but that was the plan. I would run the front of the house. My brother, and it's funny because my brother like works in parts for International Harvester, has a very good job doing that. And I work in marketing, running the front of the house. So really, it did
Typing all day.
the split did turn out exactly. And like the thing that people ask me, like the thing that paid off the most, like we talked about like how you know me or whatever, or how I do this stuff. I type 125 words a minute with not like 97, 98% accuracy. I did then, I do now. I learned on the old typewriters. And so I can do work a lot faster than people think I can. So like I have a 1,000 word piece for print for the Washington Examiner that I know is due tomorrow night. I know it's going to take me 90 minutes to write it. I've already kind of clicked it off here. It's a really nice per word rate, but I know it's going to take 90 minutes to do it perfectly. And it's a sports piece on NCAA potentially doing away with the SAT
Yep.
qualifying requirements for athletes, and it's just ready to roll. I just have to, just like I budgeted time for this, I just have to budget time for that, knock it out tomorrow night, turn it in, it'll be good. But that skill, that one skill, because what I've seen, in my role hiring younger people to come up as like marketing specialists and stuff, starting out in that field, in the past 20 years, typing on a mechanical keyboard, those skills have degraded. Touch phones have degraded the
Yeah.
tap,
Now you
tap,
can
tap on the
swipe.
thing.
Now you can
Yeah.
swipe words out.
Yeah. And you just do this, which isn't that.
Mhm.
And as a result, like those skills are in short supply. I would say a lot of them are 40 words a minute tops. That means you can do work 3 times faster than somebody. That means you can do this type of work 3 times faster than somebody. And the more of it you do, the more of it you can do. And it stacks, it compounds in that sense. So I think it's hilarious that typing is like they'll never be able to dictate faster than I can type. Like I
Right.
could dictate pretty well, but I would never need to because I could type faster. Because again, that was the old man. You don't ever need a secretary. You're your own best secretary. You don't need anybody to, like the Prince of Wales. You don't need anybody to hold your thing when you pee or whatever they do with it. That was my dad's big line. You don't need somebody to do that. Do it yourself and save one salary slot.